Hey, discussion leaders. I will start today just by giving you guys a quick rundown of the argument that we're going to present on Sunday. Hopefully, you've watched the intro video before you've watched this one, so all this will make sense as to how we're going to do things. But I'll give you a quick rundown of that argument. I'm going to post a skeleton outline of that we're going to give to students in the GroupMe and in Planning Center, so you guys can look and read through that. But the basic argument that we're going to present is going to be different than the other five that we give following this week, because this one's not really an explanation of why God allows evil, but it's more just a rebuttal and a response to the atheist or the person asking us this question, saying that this is not just a problem for Christians, but this is really a problem for everyone. And it's actually probably a bigger problem for atheists than it is for Christians or for theists. Kind of our general premise is going to be that the problem of evil is actually a better defense for God than it is a challenge to God. So the problem of evil is actually a good defense for God instead of a challenge to Him. So it is a problem for Christianity still. It's something we have to deal with, but it actually provides a better defense for God than it does for atheism. So the main question we're going to ask to kind of get this argument rolling is where does the person asking the question of why God allows bad things to happen to good people, is where this person is getting the categories of good and evil and right and wrong and wicked and fair and unfair and unjust. Where are they getting these moral categories for? And kind of the way that we want to work them down into saying is that everyone shares these moral categories. This is something that the entire globe generally recognizes. They have this general sense of right and wrong. Don't murder, don't steal, don't lie. Almost everyone in the globe, all societies practice some semblance of that morality, and they have throughout all of history. And if we can get to that point, then our response is really that we think the best explanation for that is that there's a God who created and gave all human beings this sense of general morality. We think that's the best explanation for that reality. We're going to use Romans 2:14 and 15 to kind of support that. That's Paul says that the Gentiles who don't have the law of God, when they follow the law, show that they have the law written on their hearts, that they have this conscience that accuses them and excuses them and makes them feel guilty for things, and they show that God has kind of written this general law on everyone's hearts. And again, we're going to say that the best explanation for this general morality that all of humanity shares is God. And actually, on the flip side of that atheism has really no explanation for that. If you're willing to say as an atheist that all humans share this general sense of morality, there's really no explanation within atheism for that phenomenon, because they use evolution and naturalism to explain how humans got here. And within evolution, there's natural selection. There's no right and wrong and evil and unjust. It's just survival of the fittest. And so even when a tsunami comes and wipes out a ton of humans, we would see that as evil and wicked and unfair. And why did that happen? But animals, people that evolved, or if things evolved just naturally, would see that as that's less competition. That's just the way the world works. That's not a problem. That's how animals would see that. Humans see it differently. And we think humans see it differently because they've been given this conscience and general morality from God. So that's the general argument. A lot of your responsibility this week is to actually know that argument well. So like I said, it'll be posted. You guys go through that. There's more to it than that. And you're going to hear me give a fuller explanation on Sunday. But make sure you know this well, because like I said in that first video, our main goal is that students would understand these arguments and be able to reproduce it. And so in our discussion time, that's going to be our primary goal. So the first question you're going to open up with is just allowing students to ask questions. So kind of gauge in this time whether they understand and comprehend what we just talked about, and if they don't, encourage them to ask questions. Go through this argument with them again, answer questions that they might have, and you need to kind of be well-versed on how this works in order to do that. You never know what you're going to get from students, so if you do get a question that's extremely difficult and you just have no idea how to answer it, it's fine to say, Myself or Andrew will get back to you next week. I'm not sure about the answer right now, but we'll look into it. We'll give you some kind of answer to that next week. That's fine to say, but you want to be pretty prepared to answer most of the questions you might get from students. So then you're going to move down. There's 7 questions this week. You don't have to get through all of them. I color-coded them, so the green ones are easy questions. You could go through that with either group. The red questions kind of build off of each other. They're really both the same question, and that's a difficult question. So if your group is not understanding things, do not go for question 5 and 6. Don't try to ask that question. It will just confuse them more. If they're really clicking and they got it, you can try to explore those waters and ask that question. But question 2, in my kind of introduction that you'll again see on the notes, we're going to talk about how these arguments are not really supposed to be for us to beat people over the head with. And most of the times when people are asking us why God allows bad things to happen, they're going to be coming out of their own tragedy or death or some kind of traumatic experience in their life. And so the proper response from us is not to give them one of these logical arguments and philosophy and stuff like that. We want to respond differently. And so you're just going to have some time and discussion to pursue how we should actually respond as Christians. What's the better way to respond when that happens? And there's a broad range of answers there. So let students know that. Let them kind of chew on it, brainstorm. And I gave you some scripture there, Romans 12:15, to just kind of guide you towards the answer. That just says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Usually the best response is just for us to mourn and to sit and weep and be with those people that are struggling and not try to necessarily answer their questions right then and there. So question 3, like I said, Romans 2:14 and 15 I will cover, but have a student reread that about the Gentiles having this conscience and the law written on their hearts. Romans 1:18 through 21, have another student read that. And that is where Paul talks about how we as humans have been able to perceive that God is there, that God has left kind of these hints in nature. He's been able to be perceived by everyone through all time, but we reject that. Like what can be seen about God in nature, we reject. And so you're going to read those 2 passages and then ask the students kind of what's the main argument that Paul is trying to get at here. And that is just that God has given us these hints outside of his word. It's called general revelation. You don't have to get into that. I probably don't get into that, but that nature and the intricacies with which the world works and our morality and our own conscience, he's given us these things to try to, that could point us to him. But as humans, as sinful people, we usually reject those. We don't accept those. We don't allow those to point us to God. And then you're going to ask a follow-up question in question 4, kind of relating that to this argument. And we should, the implications that we should take from that are that we shouldn't necessarily expect that even if we present this argument flawlessly to someone, that they're going to automatically believe in God, and that they're going to accept that general morality means that there's a God. Even though we believe that, and I think it's an excellent argument, most people won't. And Scripture warns us about that, tells us that we shouldn't expect that. Question 5 and 6, again, this is a difficult question. But this is great. If your students are grasping it, please get into this, because this trains students to think critically and to think through these arguments and to be able to argue well. And we want them to do that, not necessarily to argue with other people well, but we want them to be able to analyze arguments that they hear in school, find holes in arguments, and even in religious arguments that we're going to present. We want them to be able to know where the holes are. So you're going to kind of ask, if there are weaknesses in this argument, and if you were an atheist, kind of what holes might you poke into this argument? The best way, the most obvious way, is to kind of push back against this idea that there is a global morality, a global sense of right and wrong, and you can cite all sorts of differences between how cultures enforce things and the different laws that cultures have. There's certainly plenty of variety in the laws that different cultures have. And so that would be a great way to push back against this and respond to what we're trying to say. And then again, thinking even more critically, okay, that's a good idea. That's a good weakness. How could we cover that up as Christians? How could we respond to that? So again, we found the hole in the argument. Now, how do we plug that hole, or can we plug that hole? And the best response would be to say that we actually wouldn't expect perfect unity in morality as from reading the Bible, because it tells us that we're fallen humans, that we have this general sense of morality, but it's twisted because of the fall. And so we would expect very different versions of this, different perversions of the law. So an example I've given you guys is like the Nazis. They would be viewed as, like Hitler would be viewed as, not a moral person at all. But really, they didn't just in Germany condone any type of murder. They just kind of took that general principle that murder's wrong and they twisted it to actually give a reason why, well, actually, this isn't murder and this should be allowed because these people need to die. They didn't just think that anybody should be murdered. So they've taken this general principle that's actually correct and they just twist it and pervert it. And we should actually expect that, given the biblical witness, because we're fallen people. And so different cultures, they take these general moral principles and they apply them differently and they twist them differently. And but the general moral principles, if you take everything back, are still there. And that's really, people will reject that, but it's rather intuitive to see in all cultures that there's this very general sense that's shared amongst all humans. And so then the last thing, question number 7, and I'd really like for you to try to make time for this, especially if your students are getting it well. And really, even if they're not, I'd like and this is going to be an every week thing, for you guys to close out the time trying to get a student to volunteer to kind of present this argument. So you, as the discussion leader, or one of you guys will be kind of an atheist, play atheist, and you're just going to kind of rebut their argument and kind of prod them towards the answers. And they're going to try to present this argument that we've given them on this sheet of paper. And you can give them that option. If they don't feel super confident, they can bring the sheet up with them. Just ask them to delve a little bit deeper than just reading off of the sheet. But if they feel confident, have them come up, leave your sheet down there, and we're going to try to work through this argument yourself. And so you're just going to kind of role play in front of everybody. It might be kind of weird. You don't have to make it super awkward, but I think this is great for all the students to see, and for one student to actually get to practice it out. And so you'll just ask that question, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? And then their reply should be, well, actually, evil is a good defense for God. It's more of a defense for God than it is a challenge to him. And then you'll ask, well, why is that? And they'll say, well, what makes you think something is good and evil? And you're just going to kind of work line by line through this argument. And again, here as a leader, you should adjust based on how well your students are understanding things. So if they have a great grasp of it and they came up without their sheet and they're confident, then you feel free to push back beyond the sheet and ask some more difficult questions, try to find holes if they make a mistake, all in good fun, but challenge them. If they come up with their sheet and your group has been struggling to grasp it, then just really stick to that outline and don't go any deeper than that. But you guys have freedom in that. Again, we're going to try to close every week with that, because this is what we're asking students to do throughout the week. Their parents are going to ask them this question, and we want them to be able to respond. And they're not all going to get it perfectly, and that's fine, but that's why we're doing this, so that they really marinate in this argument and understand it and get it well enough that they can reproduce it, at least in some form, to someone else. So that's our goals for you guys this week. Look through the discussion questions, really study that argument, know it pretty well by Sunday. Feel free to text me, email me if you guys have any questions. But thank you guys for volunteering. Looking forward to it. Like I said, it's going to be a different series, but I'm excited. I think it's going to be great for students and for leaders.